He was walking the forest trail with his dog, thinking this was just another quiet day meant for healing. Then the dog stopped, pulled hard, dragging the veteran Navy SEAL off the path and into the trees. The ground ahead had collapsed recently, earth torn open like a wound that refused to close. Beneath the mud, metal glinted in the sunlight. A rusted vehicle, buried for years, suddenly breathing again. The soldier didn't touch it. He knew some truths demand witnesses, not heroes. So he reached for his phone, calling the right people, because justice starts with doing things the right way. Where are you watching from today? If this story pulls you in, like and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. The farther north the road carried the truck, the longer the daylight refused to surrender. Late summer sun lingered like a kindly god who didn't believe in endings. It slid across lake water in bright ribbons, turned the birch trunks into pale columns, and made the pines look almost gentle. Almost. The air smelled clean in that northern way. Sap and damp earth, a hint of wild clover, and the cold promise of deeper woods. Ronan Pierce kept both hands on the wheel even when the highway straightened and the world looked harmless. He was 43, 6'1", built the way men are built when their bodies have been trained to obey before they can complain. Broad shoulders, a hard, compact strength that didn't come from vanity but from survival. His face was angular with a defined jaw, the kind of profile that looked carved rather than born. A rough shadow of a beard clung to his cheeks and chin, more stubborn stubble than a full beard, as if his skin refused to fully relax. His eyes were a deep gray blue, steady and watchful, set beneath brows that rarely softened. Sun had browned his skin into a permanent tan, not beach tan, but field tan, earned under weather that didn't ask if you were ready. His hair was short, dark brown, cut in the practical military way, and early silver threaded his temples like quiet frost. Everything about him said efficient, even his silence. He wore one outfit, as if it were a uniform he'd chosen after the war stopped issuing them. An olive field jacket, dark blue-green cargo pants, and beneath the jacket a red and deep blue plaid shirt, an accidental flare of color that looked like a wound stitched shut. His brown leather boots were worn at the toes, the creases softened by miles. An old military watch sat on his wrist, scratched but faithful. A pocket knife clipped to his pants, discreet as a promise. And on the seat beside him, strapped down like sacred cargo, sat his Eberle-stock half-track pack, tough, heavy, built for carrying what a man couldn't carry in his hands. In the back seat sat Atlas. Atlas was a German Shepherd K9, black and tan, short, dense coat, muscle laid clean over bone. He had the balanced build of a dog engineered for work, compact power, fast reflexes, quiet endurance. His eyes were dark and intelligent, always scanning, always measuring. Even when he rested, he looked like he was listening to a frequency no one else could hear. His tactical harness hugged his shoulders, a sturdy handle on his back and a small pouch attached. Treats, a tiny light, the practical tools of a dog who never quite stopped being on duty. His collar was wide and strong, the tag against his chest stamped with one name: Atlas. Now and then, Atlas glanced at Ronan in the rearview mirror. It wasn't the eager look of a pet asking for love. It was the look of a partner checking if the other partner was lying. "Don't pretend you're fine," that look said. Ronan pretended anyway. He told himself he was driving north because he needed quiet, because Atlas needed cooler air and calmer ground, because the cabin was there, waiting, and a man didn't ignore what was given to him, not after everything that had been taken. But the truest reason sat folded in a manila envelope in the glove compartment, humming like a wound that had learned to sing. A will, a last message, a voice from the past, calling him by name. When Ronan pulled into the small lakeside town, it looked like a place time had forgiven. A diner with a buzzing neon sign, a general store with rocking chairs out front, hanging flower baskets and tidy sidewalks. Older locals who watched with the slow curiosity of people who'd seen strangers come and go, and who had learned to read the ones who stayed. Ronan drove through without stopping, He didn't want an audience. He wanted an exit. The cabin sat a few miles outside town, tucked near the lake and wrapped in birch and pine. When Ronan stepped out, the air hit. Eve iced him, cooler, fresher, bright with the smell of sap and water. Atlas hopped down and stood very still, nose lifted, drawing the world into his lungs like a prayer. Ronan carried his half-track inside, then sat at the kitchen table and finally opened the manila envelope. The paper inside was plain and legal, but the handwriting on the last page was unmistakable. Bold, slanted, alive. Connor Sully Sullivan. Sully had been Ronan's teammate once. Loud smile, quick jokes, the kind of man who could turn fear into laughter just by existing near it. Sully had carried courage like a torch, bright enough to warm everyone around him. But he'd also carried something else, an invisible weight that he hid behind humor until it became too heavy to hide. Sully was gone now. The will was short. Cabin to Ronan Pierce, tools included, boat included. A final note in Sully's handwriting, ink pressed hard enough to bruise the page. If you still hear the war at night, take it somewhere, the eye. Birds are louder. Go north. Ronan read it once, twice. On the third time, his vision blurred, not from tears he allowed to fall, but from the way his eyes refused to stay calm when the heart shifted underneath them. He swallowed hard. His jaw clenched. The old instinct rose. Lock it down. Keep moving. Don't break. Atlas padded over and pressed his head against Ronan's thigh, firm and steady. Not affection. Anchoring. A reminder that there was a present moment, and it mattered. Ronan let out one controlled breath, then another. The room was quiet except for birds outside, singing like they'd never learned the language of grief. That night, Ronan slept in fragments. The cabin creaked. The lake whispered at the shore. Atlas lay near the door, ears tuned, breathing slow and even. In the morning, Ronan drove into town for supplies. He tried to keep it simple: coffee, food, a few tools. He didn't plan to talk to anyone. The North had other plans. Outside the general store, a woman leaned against a pickup truck as if she owned the air around it. She wore a ranger uniform in muted green, a utility belt with a radio and flashlight, and hiking boots scuffed by honest work. She was in her early 60s, tall, square-shouldered, suntanned, with steel gray hair pulled back into a low bun that did not tolerate nonsense. Her eyes were brown and sharp, the kind that noticed what people tried to hide under polite smiles. June Holloway watched Ronan approach the way a seasoned card player watches a new hand. "You're the cabin guy," she said. Her voice was dry, with humor tucked under it like a knife under a sleeve. Ronan nodded once. "Ronan?" June's gaze slid to Atlas. The dog stood beside Ronan, posture calm, eyes alert. A working dog's stillness. "That's a K9, June said, not a question." "Retired," Ronan replied. June made a quiet sound in her throat. "Retired dogs don't look like that." Her mouth twitched. "That one looks like he's still clocked in." Atlas sneezed once. Sharp, perfectly timed, like punctuation at the end of June's sentence. For a second, June's expression softened. Almost a smile. Ronan felt a tiny crack of warmth in his chest, so small he almost missed it. June tilted her head toward the North Road. "You planning any hikes?" "Just settling in," Ronan said. June's eyes narrowed. "Good, because we had heavy rain up past the service road, fresh washouts, slides. The restricted corridor is unstable." "How fresh?" Ronan asked, the old part of him waking up at the word restricted. "Fresh enough to eat a truck," June said, "and not spit out the tires." Atlas's nose lifted, his ears angled forward. He stared past June, past the store, toward the tree line as if something had called his name in a language only dogs could translate. Then Atlas pulled. Not a frantic tug, an insistent, purposeful draw, like a compass needle snapping north. "Atlas," Ronan warned, softly. The dog didn't disobey so much as insist. June watched, eyebrow raised. "Well," she said, voice faintly amused, "looks like your settling in has been rescheduled." Ronan hesitated, then followed. They walked beyond town, where pavement surrendered to dirt and birches stood like pale witnesses. The air cooled under the trees. The forest smelled fresh, wet, newly wounded. Atlas led with certainty, moving fast, then slowing, then stopping, head low, nostrils flaring. His tail stayed down, not in fear, but in focus. June's humor dropped away. "That's not a rabbit," she murmured. Atlas took 2 careful steps, then froze. His breathing changed, deep, slow inhalations. A low sound vibrated in his chest. Not a growl of aggression, something closer to recognition. Ronan's skin prickled. For a moment, he felt as if the forest itself had leaned in to watch them. They reached the edge of a fresh mud scar where the earth had been torn open. Uprooted trees lay, sideways like fallen giants. Broken branches pointed toward the sky like accusing fingers. Sunlight still spilled through the canopy, bright and warm, but here the air tasted cold. Something curved beneath the mud, metal, rust-red, half-buried, like the back of a beast trying to crawl out of the ground. Ronan stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into soft earth. He crouched and brushed away wet grit. A roofline, a shattered light bar, a vehicle angled sideways, trapped in the slide as if the forest had taken it and tried to forget it. June's face tightened. She reached for her radio with quick, practiced motion. "I'm calling this in," she said. "No touching anything else." Ronan nodded, though his hand hovered over the metal like it was drawn by gravity. June spoke into the radio. "Sheriff Reyes? June Holloway. I've got a possible vehicle off the restricted service track. Old, partially exposed by the slide. You'll want to see this." A calm voice crackled back. "On my way." Atlas moved to the undercarriage and inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. Then he let out a low rumble again. Quiet, steady, almost mournful. Ronan leaned closer, listening to the dog's body language like it was a map. June glanced at Ronan. "Your dog looks like he remembers something." Ronan swallowed. "He's never been here." June's eyes didn't leave Atlas. "Sometimes memory doesn't need a place," she said. "Sometimes it just needs a smell." When Sheriff Callum Reyes arrived, he carried authority like a well-fitted jacket, firm, practical, not flashy. He was in his 40s, solidly built, uniform clean against the mud. His eyes were warm but sharp, scanning terrain and people with the same careful attention. Reyes nodded to June first, then to Ronan. "Ronan Pierce?" Ronan's posture tightened a fraction. "Yes." Reyes's gaze dropped to Atlas. "And that's Atlas," Ronan said. Atlas didn't look at the sheriff for long. His attention was on the vehicle, as if introductions were a luxury. June spoke before Reyes could ask more. "Atlas led us here." Reyes exhaled slowly. "All right, we do this clean. Tape, photos, no hero stuff." June's mouth twitched. "You mean no Ronan stuff?" Ronan's humor flickered in his eyes, dry as dust. "I don't know what you're talking about." Atlas sneezed again, like he strongly disagreed. Reyes stepped closer, careful with his footing. He studied the vehicle, then the slide, then the twisted roots beside it. Ronan watched the sheriff's face shift, subtle, but real. The look of a man recognizing a shadow from an old file. Before Reyes could speak, Atlas pressed his nose into a hollow where roots tangled with mud. He pawed lightly, careful, controlled, then stopped and stared at the spot like he was waiting for permission from the universe. Ronan crouched. Between packed earth and dry root fibers, something caught the sun. A small glint, pale gold, stubborn as daylight. A locket, still intact, still shining. Ronan reached out, fingers hovering just above it, and felt his heart darken by one slow, heavy beat, because some objects weren't objects. They were doors, and this one had just opened. By the time Sheriff Callum Reyes arrived, the forest had learned how to hold its breath. Yellow tape cut clean lines through green chaos. A pair of orange cones stood where no cones had ever stood before, bright and slightly absurd against mud and roots. The slide lay exposed now, not dramatic anymore, just wounded earth, wet and quiet, as if embarrassed to have revealed something it had tried to keep. Reyes stepped out of his cruiser with the kind of calm that didn't rush grief and didn't fear it either. He was in his mid-40s, solid without being bulky, his sheriff's uniform pressed and practical. His hair was dark with faint silver at the edges, his jaw clean-shaven, his eyes steady, brown and attentive, the eyes of a man who listened more than he spoke. When he walked, he didn't swing authority around like a weapon. He wore it like a tool. June Holloway met him halfway. "Slide exposed a vehicle," she said. "Looks old. No one touched anything after we saw it." Reyes nodded once, already scanning the terrain. "Good." Ronan stood a few steps back, hands loose at his sides, posture neutral. He felt the old itch, the need to move, to assess, to take control. But he stayed still. This wasn't his op. Not yet. Atlas stood beside him, black and tan coat, flecked with drying mud, eyes never leaving the wreck. Reyes noticed the dog immediately. Everyone did. "That him?" the sheriff asked quietly. June's mouth twitched. "Atlas, retired K-9. Reyes studied the dog for a beat longer than necessary. "Doesn't look retired." Atlas sneezed once, sharp and unimpressed. Ronan almost smiled. Reyes turned to the scene. "All right, let's do this clean." He lifted his radio. "County evidence. Photos first. Then we stabilize the slope before we go poking around." A short while later, a county truck pulled in, and with it came Lila Grant, evidence technician, early 30s, lean and athletic, hair the color of dark honey braided tight down her back. Her face was pale under freckles, eyes gray and focused, expression clipped into professional calm. She wore field gear built for dirt and patience, gloves tucked into her belt. She greeted Reyes with a nod. "Show me." Lila worked like someone who believed facts deserved respect. She photographed the slide from multiple angles, marked the ground with small numbered flags, narrated into a recorder with a rhythm that made chaos feel sortable. Mud came off in careful strokes, not scrapes. Nothing rushed, nothing guessed. Ronan watched with the part of him that appreciated discipline. Atlas watched with the part of him that never forgot a smell. The locket lay in a padded tray on the tailgate of Lila's truck, sealed in a clear evidence sleeve. Sunlight caught the pale gold surface, and for a moment it looked warm, almost alive. "Sealed construction," Lila murmured, lifting it gently. "Not cheap. Whoever made this wanted it to last." June crossed her arms. "Or wanted it to survive." Lila glanced up. "Those two things aren't always different." She opened the locket with a thin tool, slow and precise. The hinge gave with a soft click, like a held breath finally released. Inside, a photograph stared back at them from another life. A woman with tired eyes and a soft, crooked smile. Light hair pulled back loosely. One arm around a little girl with round cheeks and serious eyes, fingers clutching fabric like the world might slip away if she let go. Lila angled the locket toward the light. Photos protected, minimal water damage. Ronan felt something tighten behind his ribs. Lila turned the locket over. 2 words were engraved cleanly on the back, as if they had been meant to be read long after the voice that carved them had gone quiet. "Always north." June inhaled slowly. "That's not decorative." Reyes nodded. "No, that's instruction." Atlas stepped closer, nose lowering toward the open locket. He inhaled. Once, then again, slow, deep, deliberate. His ears shifted, his body stilled. Ronan watched the change in the dog's posture, the way Atlas seemed to recognize something without understanding it, like a word learned in a dream. "He's reacting," June said softly. Reyes glanced at Ronan. "Your dog read the room before we did." Ronan swallowed. "He does that." Lila snapped the locket shut and resealed it. "We'll run the photo through missing persons," she said, "and I'll catalog the engraving." She moved back to the vehicle, brushing mud from the doorframe with careful strokes. What clung to her glove wasn't blood or mystery. It was darker, thicker. "Coal-rich soil," she said, "mixed with iron oxide, old runoff." June nodded. "That fits. This area had logging spurs and shallow mining decades ago." "Which explains why searches would have been limited," Reyes said. "Unstable ground." Ronan felt a faint chill, not from the air, from the idea that absence could be explained so neatly. As Lila worked, Atlas paced slowly around the wreck, nose tracing invisible lines. He paused at the undercarriage, inhaled, then moved to a patch of ground where mud met older, drier soil. He stopped and sat, formal, deliberate. Ronan crouched beside him. "You've got old and new," he murmured. "Show me." Atlas shifted his weight, eyes flicking between the two textures. Ronan turned to Reyes. "The slide's recent," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "But the vehicle's been here a long time. Mud on the lower panels is compacted, older. What washed down last week just exposed it." Reyes studied the area, then nodded. "So nobody missed it?" "No," Ronan said. The ground hid it. June exhaled. "The forest keeps secrets well." Reyes straightened and looked at Ronan with a new kind of attention. "You trained SAR?" Ronan didn't like how easily the past came back to the surface. "Among other things." "And you know this terrain?" "Enough to keep people alive." Reyes considered him for a beat. "I could use a volunteer consultant. Search and rescue advisory only. No cowboy work." June snorted. "That is the cowboy work?" Ronan's mouth twitched. "I don't ride horses." Atlas sneezed, as if offended by the implication. Reyes's eyes softened slightly. "Good, because this place doesn't forgive mistakes." Ronan nodded. "I'll help." The words felt heavier than they should have, like accepting a compass from a stranger and realizing it only pointed one way. By late afternoon, the scene was secured. Reyes posted signage. Lila packed her equipment. The forest exhaled, just a little, as if relieved the humans had learned how to behave. Ronan drove back to the cabin with Atlas riding silent in the back. The road curved through birch and pine, light stretching long and golden. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. The cabin creaked that night, the way old things do when they're remembering. Ronan tried to sleep. He failed. Wind brushed the leaves, and it sounded, just for a moment, like someone whispering his name through branches. Atlas rose and made his rounds. He checked the windows with methodical care, ears high, body loose but ready. Then he sat in front of the door, back straight, gaze fixed outward, less guard dog than sentry. A statue carved from loyalty. Ronan watched him from the couch. "You think something's coming," he said quietly. Atlas didn't turn his head. That was answer enough. Sometime before dawn, Ronan slept in shallow pieces. Dreams came without permission. Sand, shouting, the metallic taste of fear, and left him clenched and cold. When he woke, the light was pale and forgiving. Ronan opened the front door to breathe. Something lay on the wooden step, a folded piece of paper. Clean. Intentional. Atlas froze behind him, ears snapping forward. Ronan stared at the paper for a long moment, feeling the old weight settle into place. The familiar sense that the world had chosen him for something he hadn't volunteered for. He bent down and picked it up. The note was unadorned. No signature. No flourish. 2 words, written in block letters. Stop digging. The town looked harmless in daylight. It wore summer like a clean shirt. Flower baskets, sunlit sidewalks, the lazy buzz of a diner sign, and older locals who moved slow on purpose, as if hurrying might invite misfortune to jog alongside. The lake beyond the rooftops glittered, bright enough to make a man believe the world could be forgiven. Ronan Pierce didn't let himself believe it. He drove in with his shoulders squared and his mind quietly braced, the olive field jacket hanging on him like a chosen uniform. Dark cargo pants, red and deep blue plaid beneath, worn brown boots, old military watch ticking steady as a metronome. The pocket knife clipped at his hip like a small private oath. Atlas rode in the back seat, black and tan coat sleek, posture calm but alert. The German shepherd's eyes tracked reflections in storefront windows and the shifting shapes of pedestrians. Even retired, Atlas moved like a working soul, disciplined, observant, conserving energy as if it were a currency. Ronan kept one hand near his jacket pocket where the locket rested, cool metal, heavier than its size, like it had gravity of its own. The library sat a block off Main Street, brick-faced and modest, wide windows letting in soft light. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled of paper, dust, and faint lemon cleaner, like memories that had been handled carefully for decades. Sun pooled across the wooden floor in calm rectangles. It was the kind of place built for whispers, not warnings. Atlas paused at the entrance, nose lifting, as if the building had a history he could smell. "Easy," Ronan murmured. "This is where people fight with bookmarks." Atlas blinked slowly, unimpressed by Ronan's dry humor. At the front desk sat Harriet Bloom. She was late 60s, small but sturdy, the way a tree can be narrow and still survive storms. Her silver hair was neatly styled, soft waves framing a face lined by both laughter and loss. Thin-framed glasses rested on her nose. Her eyes, kind, sharp, landed on Ronan as if she'd seen men like him before, men who stood straight while something inside them leaned. She wore a sand-colored cardigan over a crisp white blouse, practical slacks, sensible shoes. Nothing flashy, just the quiet armor of someone who had learned the world didn't reward showmanship, only steadiness. Harriet's gaze flicked to Atlas. "Well," she said, voice warm with a hint of mischief, "you didn't come alone." Ronan nodded. "Ronan?" Harriet's eyes didn't immediately leave his face. "Did you sleep?" The question was simple, but it struck like a thumb pressed gently into a bruise. Harriet didn't ask where he served or what he'd done. She asked the question that mattered to a man who carried war in his ribs. "Not much," Ronan admitted. Harriet's expression softened, not with pity, more like recognition. "Quiet places can be loud," she said, "especially for people who've spent years listening for danger." Atlas sneezed once, sharp, like punctuation. Harriet paused mid-motion, then nodded to him solemnly. "Bless you," she said, as if Atlas were a patron with a library card and a long reading list. Ronan almost smiled. Almost. He set the locket on the desk carefully. Harriet's eyes sharpened. "That," she said, "is not a souvenir." Ronan opened it, showing the photo, Lorelei holding a small girl. Harriet didn't gasp. She leaned in, reading the faces the way librarians read margins. Then Ronan turned it over so she could see the engraving. "Always North." Harriet's breath caught, so quietly it was almost nothing, but Ronan heard it anyway. "You've seen this phrase," he said. Harriet's gaze drifted past Ronan as if she could see the town's past layered over its present. "I've seen it," she replied, "and I've seen what people do when they think a phrase can protect them." She stepped from behind the desk. "Come, local history room." They walked between shelves stacked with gentle order. The back rooms smelled older, paper aging into something like incense. Along one wall sat drawers of microfiche, labeled in careful black print. Harriet opened them with the familiar grace of someone who had spent decades guiding other people toward truths they weren't sure they wanted. "This town keeps records," Harriet said, sliding a fiche into the reader. "Because small places can't afford to forget. Forgetting is expensive." The machine hummed softly as she turned the dial. Black and white text blossomed onto the screen. A newspaper page from 12 years ago. Ronan leaned in. Atlas sat beside him, upright, harness straps taut over his shoulders, eyes fixed on Harriet's hands as if they were the hands that might open a locked door. Harriet traced a headline with her fingertip. State Trooper Missing. Search continues. Mason Klein, Harriet murmured. That name still hangs in this town like fog. Ronan felt his jaw tighten. The sheriff said it became a cold case. It became a quiet case, Harriet corrected. Cold implies people still touch it. Quiet means they set it down and walk around it. She scrolled lower and tapped a small paragraph halfway down the page. Ronan read it twice to make sure it was real. A volunteer search team reported hearing a dog bark at approximately 2:17 a.m. near the restricted service road. The K-9 was not affiliated with the official K-9 unit, but belonged to a private volunteer handler assisting the search. Ronan looked up. So the bark wasn't from a police K-9? Harriet shook her head. No, it was a volunteer SAR dog. People love turning that into a ghost story, but it was a living animal doing what animals do, trying to find someone who didn't come home. Atlas's ears shifted, subtle but sharp. His nostrils flared once, as if the printed words carried a scent. Harriet adjusted the reader again and pulled another fiche. A smaller local piece, community notes, volunteer lists, a mention of informal emergency meetups. Harriet's voice dropped a little, the way voices do when they move from public fact to private truth. Always north, she said, tapping the line, was used by a small circle. Not official, not advertised, a direction to a safe point. A safe point, Ronan repeated. Harriet nodded. When someone needed help and didn't want half the town listening. Ronan opened the locket again and angled it slightly. There was something inside, he said. Harriet put on thin cotton gloves, habit and reverence, and examined the hinge. With tweezers, she eased out a sliver of waterproof paper tucked so neatly it might have been part of the locket's design. She placed it on the table between them. On it, written in firm, careful letters, was a location. Silver Pine Point. Ronan stared at the words. He didn't like how they felt, like coordinates on a map he hadn't agreed to. Follow. Harriet watched his face. That's not far from the lake, she said. Pretty in daylight, lonely after dark. Ronan hesitated, then asked the question that had been scraping the inside of his mind all morning. If someone left a warning for me, he said slowly, how would they know I was involved? Harriet's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. They'd have to be watching, she said, either you or the place you found. Atlas let out a low sound, barely audible, and leaned a fraction closer to Ronan's leg. Not fear, readiness. Harriet's voice stayed calm, but her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. Some people in this town have practiced silence for a long time, she said. Silence becomes a habit. Habits become chains. Ronan's gray-blue eyes held steady. I'm not good with chains. Harriet's mouth quirked. I can see that. She handed him the paper, and Ronan folded it carefully, sliding it into his jacket pocket like a match he wasn't sure he should strike. As they walked back toward the front, Harriet paused near the circulation desk and poured tea into a paper cup. She offered it to Ronan with a kind of quiet insistence that didn't accept refusal. Drink, she said. It won't solve your problems, but it might keep you from making new ones. Ronan took it. The tea was warm, slightly sweet, grounding. Atlas sat beside the desk like a stern guard at a temple gate. His eyes followed a child who ran too fast between shelves. Then his gaze returned to the door, always scanning, always north. They stepped outside into bright afternoon. The town looked the same, sun, flowers, slow-moving locals. Yet Ronan felt the world had shifted a fraction, as if someone had adjusted a lens. That's when a volunteer fire truck rolled past. Its red paint flashed in the sunlight, cheerful and loud, the kind of vehicle children waved at. The driver was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s wearing a faded cap and a denim jacket. His face was sun-lined, jaw heavy, and his eyes, when they flicked toward Ronan, turned away too quickly. A small human moment. But Atlas reacted. The dog's body stiffened. His ears snapped forward. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, not loud enough to draw a crowd, but clear enough to make Ronan stop mid-step. Atlas shifted slightly in front of Ronan, blocking him with his body, like a living warning sign. Ronan's pulse kicked. He followed Atlas's line of sight across the street. Behind a birch tree planted like decoration, a figure stood half-hidden, tall, motionless, too still for casual waiting. The shape didn't wave or approach. It simply existed for 2 heartbeats, long enough to be noticed, then slipped away behind the tree line and vanished into the ordinary bustle of town. Ronan exhaled slowly. Harriet, standing just inside the doorway, watched him with sober eyes. "You saw that," she said. "Yes," Ronan replied. "And your dog," Harriet added softly, "doesn't like it." Atlas sneezed once, sharp, irritated, almost offended. For a split second, Ronan felt laughter rise, dry, absurd, the kind of humor that showed up at funerals and gunfights just to prove the heart still had tricks. Then it died in his throat, because the feeling that replaced it was older and colder. Someone was close enough to watch him in daylight. That night, Ronan returned to the cabin with the folded paper in his pocket and a quiet heaviness in his chest. He checked the locks more out of ritual than belief. Atlas patrolled the windows with methodical precision, ears high, steps silent. Ronan sat at the kitchen table and stared at the locket, closed now, as if it had nothing to say. The lake outside whispered against the shore. He tried to tell himself he would follow the sheriff's process. He tried to tell himself he wouldn't chase anything alone. He tried 100 lies, and none of them fit. Near midnight, his phone rang. Unknown number. Ronan answered without greeting, voice low. "Pierce?" Silence breathed into his ear. Then a man's voice, rough, older, as if it had swallowed too much smoke and too many regrets. "Listen," the voice said. "You don't know what you're stepping into." Ronan's grip tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" A pause, long enough to feel like shame. "Doesn't matter," the man said. "Just don't keep digging." Ronan's jaw clenched. "You're the one who's afraid." Another pause. The voice dropped, quieter, less command and more confession. "If you have to," the man said, "then be careful. The forest isn't the only thing that buries people." The line went dead. Ronan sat very still, phone pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. Across the room, Atlas stood up, silent, steady, eyes fixed on the dark window as if he could see the shape of danger moving through the trees. Outside, the birches whispered. Inside, Ronan felt the north tighten its grip around his fate. Silver Pine Point looked like a place the world had dressed carefully, as if beauty itself were a warning. Sunlight spilled across the lake in bright, broken sheets, turning the water into hammered silver. The pines stood tall and dark along the shore, their reflections trembling gently, while birches flashed white between shadows, like ribs beneath skin. The air was clean, sharp, and deceptively calm, the kind of calm that made grief feel out of place, almost rude. Ronan Pierce stepped out of June Holloway's Ranger truck and let his boots settle into the soil. The earth here felt firmer than near the slide, older somehow, as if it remembered every footstep that had ever tried to flee across it. June shut the door and adjusted her ranger hat, eyes scanning the tree line. In daylight, she looked unshakable, late 60s, square-shouldered, sun-worn skin, steel-gray hair pulled back tight. Humor lived in her mouth, but vigilance lived in her bones. "Pretty," she said, almost suspiciously. "Places like this make people think nothing bad can happen." Ronan didn't answer. He stood still, letting his senses widen. The olive field jacket hugged his broad shoulders. The plaid beneath caught the light like a muted flare. His face, angular, stubbled, weathered, gave nothing away, but his eyes tracked every movement, every shift in shadow. War had taught him that beauty didn't mean safety. Sometimes it meant bait. Atlas jumped down from the truck and immediately went still. The German shepherd's posture changed in a way Ronan had learned to read long before words became necessary. Atlas's head lifted, his ears angled forward, his nostrils flared wide, drawing in the breeze that skimmed the lake's surface and slid back toward the trees. June noticed. "What's he got?" Ronan watched the dog's spine tighten. "Not an animal," he said quietly. "Something wrong." Atlas moved, fast, decisive, not chasing, tracking. He surged forward, along the shoreline, paused silent on pine needles and damp earth. His nose stayed high, cutting through the air instead of the ground, like he was following a feeling rather than a trail. Ronan swore under his breath and took off after him. "Atlas!" June barked, but she was already running too. They followed the curve of the lake, where the ground sloped sharply downward. Sunlight flashed off the water so brightly it hurt to look at, and for one breathless moment, Ronan thought Atlas had made a mistake. Then the lake answered. A splash, violent, panicked. Water churned near a cluster of rocks just offshore. A human shape broke the surface, arms flailing, head dipping under and snapping back up in desperate rhythm. "Jesus," June breathed. Ronan didn't hesitate. He stripped off his jacket in one motion, boots pounding toward the edge, and dove. The cold hit him like a physical blow, shock ripping air from his lungs, muscles seizing for a half-second that felt like judgment. Training took over before panic could. He kicked hard, surfaced, and saw her clearly now. She was young, 19 maybe, slender in the way youth often was when fear hadn't yet hardened it. Dark brown hair clung to her face in wet strands, her skin pale beneath gooseflesh and freckles. Her eyes were wide, green hazel, frantic with the kind of terror that knew it might not be rescued. Ronan reached her just as she slipped under again. He caught her beneath the arm, hauled her back up, and turned them toward shore. "I've got you," he said, voice steady, low. "Breathe when I say." She gasped, choking, then obeyed, instinctively trusting the calm in his tone even as her body shook. On shore, Atlas stood at the edge, barking sharply, rhythmically, not aggression, but alarm, not just calling for help, calling attention. June dropped to her knees and reached out as Ronan dragged the girl close enough to grab. Together, they pulled her onto the bank, water streaming from her clothes, breath tearing out of her in sobs and coughs. The girl curled onto her side, shivering violently. June wrapped her in a thermal blanket from her pack, hands efficient, practiced. "You're safe," she said, firm as a command. "You're safe now." The girl shook her head weakly. No, I was—" Ronan crouched beside her, dripping, muscles burning. "Name," he said gently. She swallowed, teeth chattering. "Lena," she managed. "Lena." "Marrow." Her eyes flicked toward the trees behind them, terror flaring fresh. "He was there," she whispered. "I heard him. I ran. I slipped." Ronan followed her gaze, instinct screaming. "Who?" "I don't know," Lena said, breath hitching, "but he was following me. I felt it." Atlas moved closer, sniffing the air around her, not invasive, not frantic, focused. His tail stayed low, body angled protectively between Lena and the forest. He paused, then let out a low, displeased rumble. Not loud, but unmistakable. June's face tightened. "You came here alone?" Lena nodded miserably. "I was supposed to meet someone." Ronan's pulse thudded. "Who told you to come?" Lena hesitated, eyes filling. They said if I wanted the truth about my mother, I had to come here." Ronan's hand went unconsciously to the pocket where the locket rested. He pulled it out. The moment Lena saw it, the world stopped for her. Her breath caught. Her eyes locked onto the gold oval as if it were a living thing. She reached out, then froze, afraid to touch it. "That's hers," she whispered. Ronan held it steady. "Your mother?" Lena nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Lorelei, That was her locket. They told me she ran away, that she didn't want me." Her voice broke. "She wouldn't have left this." June closed her eyes briefly, as if acknowledging a truth that had been circling for years. Ronan felt the shape of the story shift inside him. No longer rusted metal and buried ground, but flesh and blood and a family torn wrong. June reached for her radio. "Reyes," she said, "we've got a survivor. Young woman. Possible attempted assault. We need you at Silver Pine Point." Atlas sat beside Lena, close enough that his flank touched her shin. She startled, then let out a shaky laugh despite herself. "He's guarding me," she said weakly. Ronan's mouth twitched. "He's thorough." Atlas sneezed once, nose nudging lightly at the pocket of Lena's jacket. A crinkling sound answered. Lena blinked. "Hey." Then she laughed again, breathless. "I guess even dogs can smell granola bars." June shook her head. "Security inspection," she deadpanned. When Sheriff Callum Reyes arrived, he took in the scene with practiced calm. Ronan wet and breathing hard, June kneeling beside Lena, Atlas planted like a sentinel. Reyes's expression softened when he crouched beside Lena, careful not to crowd her. "I'm Sheriff Reyes," he said. "You're safe here, I promise." Lena studied his face, looking for something she could trust, then nodded slowly. Harriet Bloom arrived not long after, cardigan fluttering as she stepped from her car. The librarian's eyes found Lena immediately, and her expression cracked open with quiet grief and fierce tenderness. "Oh, sweetheart," Harriet murmured. She knelt and opened her arms. Lena hesitated only a second before collapsing into that embrace, sobbing into Harriet's shoulder. The older woman held her tightly, one hand smoothing Lena's hair, as if the library itself had reached out to gather a lost page back into its binding. Ronan turned away slightly, throat tight. Reyes stood beside him. "This isn't just a vehicle anymore," the sheriff said quietly. "This is personal." Ronan nodded. "Someone lured her here." "And someone followed her," Reyes added. "We're not ignoring that." To Ronan's surprise, a younger deputy approached from one of the patrol vehicles, a lean man in his late 20s with short dark hair and alert eyes, moving with contained energy. He carried a sling bag heavy with equipment. "Deputy Eden Park," he said, offering a quick nod. His voice was brisk, thoughtful. "Sheriff, I was thinking we should set trail cams along the restricted corridor. No guesswork, and I can run a drone sweep for tire tracks." Reyes considered, then nodded. "Do it," quietly. Eden's gaze flicked to Atlas, admiration obvious. "That's Atlas, right?" Atlas looked at him once, then lay down again beside Lena. "Guess he approves," Eden said with a faint grin. Atlas did not move. That night, after Lena was taken somewhere safe and guarded, Eden placed the trail cameras with methodical care. Small black eyes hidden among branches, watching roads people weren't supposed to use anymore. The forest accepted them without comment. Hours later, long after the sun had given up the sky, one camera recorded movement, a dark SUV, no headlights, slipping into the restricted road like it had done so before. By morning, the forest had rearranged itself, not in ways people could see, but in the way tension gathered where quiet had once lived. The air felt heavier, the birds louder and more cautious, as if sound itself were trying to cover its tracks. Dew clung to needles and leaves, catching light like a field of tiny mirrors. Somewhere out there, something had learned it was being noticed. Deputy Eden Park stood beside his patrol SUV, tablet in hand, eyes moving fast as data scrolled. He was lean, late 20s, with a focused intensity that made him look older than he was when he worked. Short, dark hair, no beard, jaw set with the kind of determination that came from believing process could still save people. "It's not a lost tourist," Eden said, tapping the screen and turning it toward Sheriff Callum Reyes. "The SUV shows up 3 separate nights, same corridor, same entry window, no headlights." Reyes frowned. "So it knows the road." "And the cameras," Eden added. It skirts the edges. Whoever's driving understands blind spots. Ronan Pierce listened without interrupting, arms crossed loosely, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. The olive field jacket was zipped higher today, as if the air had cooled or his patience had. Atlas sat beside him, booted paw tucked carefully beneath his chest, eyes alert but disciplined, working within new limits. June Holloway leaned against a tree, ranger hat shading her eyes. "Drone picked up something else," she said. "Heat signature, old structure, about a mile past the restricted bend." Reyes looked at Ronan. "Observation only," he said. "You advise, you don't advance." Ronan nodded once. Understood. They moved in a tight formation, spacing careful, boots quiet. The drone's coordinates led them off the main track and into denser cover, where sunlight thinned and the forest smelled older, oil-soaked earth, damp wood, iron. Atlas's ears flicked, nostrils testing the air. With a professional patience that had not dulled with retirement, the shack appeared without ceremony. It sat low and crooked among the trees, boards gray and warped, roof sagging like a tired shoulder. Someone had tried to hide it. Brush dragged up against the walls, a tarp half buried under needles. A place meant to be passed over by anyone who didn't already know it was there. Ronan lifted a hand. Halt. Atlas froze instantly, muscles coiled. There was a smell. Diesel, faint but fresh enough to argue with the rot of old wood. And beneath it, something sharper, almost sweet. Cedar oil, pine extract, the kind of scent people used to mask what they didn't want found. "Someone's covering tracks," Ronan murmured. "Badly?" June nodded. "Old tricks." They edged closer. The ground near the doorway looked disturbed, too neat in places, too chaotic in others. Ronan scanned the approach, instincts flaring, but it was Atlas who moved first. The dog surged forward. One sharp step, then stopped dead. He pivoted and lunged sideways, slamming his shoulder into Ronan's shin with controlled force. Whoa! Ronan staggered back just as a rusted wire snapped taut where his foot had been headed. The wire jerked a crude mechanism hidden beneath leaves, old nails lashed to a plank, flung upward by tension and gravity. Atlas yelped. The plank grazed his front paw. Not deep, not catastrophic, but enough. Atlas limped back, breathing hard, eyes bright with pain and frustration. Blood darkened the pad beneath the boot. Ronan dropped to his knees instantly, heart slamming against his ribs like it wanted out. "Hey," he said softly, hands shaking despite years of training. "Hey, I've got you." He scooped Atlas up, 45 pounds of muscle and trust, and held him close. The dog leaned into him, whining once, then going still, as if to say, "I did my job." The sunlight filtered through branches, warm and golden, absurdly beautiful. Ronan's eyes went dark. Reyes swore under his breath and backed everyone off. "Trap," he said. "Old materials. Intentional." "Designed to injure, not kill," June added. "Warning." Ronan pressed his forehead briefly to Atlas's neck. "You saved me," he whispered. Atlas huffed softly, offended by the obviousness. They withdrew immediately. Dr. Mira Sutton met them at the ranger station, a woman in her early 40s with steady hands and kind eyes sharpened by competence. She had dark hair pulled into a practical bun, faint smile lines at the corners of her mouth, and the posture of someone who had learned to project calm into chaos. She cleaned Atlas's paw with meticulous care, speaking to him in a low, even tone. "You're a difficult patient," she said mildly. "And by difficult, I mean you're pretending not to be hurt." Atlas flicked an ear, clearly listening. Mira wrapped the pad, fitted a lightweight protective boot, and looked at Ronan. "He's fine," she said. "No tendon damage, but he's on track and alert, only for now. No chasing, no heroics." Atlas glanced up at her. Mira met his gaze. "I know," she said. "I hear everything." Atlas sneezed, indignant. For the first time all day, Ronan laughed, brief, cracked, real. That evening, the town settled into its routines. Lights flicked on. Doors closed. The forest leaned in closer. Ronan didn't go back to the cabin. He waited. The call came just after dark. A payphone rang at the edge of the volunteer firehouse, a sound almost no one noticed anymore. Ronan stood beneath a flickering street lamp, Atlas resting at his side, booted paw stretched out like a badge of honor. A man stepped from the shadows. Noah Pike was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered with the soft heaviness of someone who'd carried too much for too long. His beard was gray-flecked and uneven, as if he'd trimmed it without much care. His eyes were tired, brown, watchful, filled with the kind of fear that had learned patience. He wore a volunteer firefighter jacket, scuffed and faded, smelling faintly of smoke and engine oil. "You shouldn't be out here," Noah said, voice low. Ronan didn't move. "You called." Noah swallowed. "Yeah." Atlas lifted his head and watched Noah carefully. No growl, no bark, just attention. "That note," Ronan said. "Stop digging." Noah closed his eyes. "That was me." Silence stretched. "I was there 12 years ago," Noah continued, voice rough. "When the search went wrong, when the focus shifted." His hands curled into fists. "I saw someone redirect it, subtle, smiling, said it was about safety." Ronan waited. "I didn't say anything," Noah whispered. "I was scared. Job, family. You know how it is." Ronan nodded. He did know. Noah's voice dropped even lower. "The evil here doesn't growl," he said. "It smiles, shakes hands, signs papers." Ronan stepped closer. "Silence is a hole," he said quietly. "I'm going to fill it." Noah's shoulders sagged with relief and terror. "There's a name," Noah said. "Land management, old contracts, timber and access rights." He hesitated. "If you push, he'll push back." Atlas shifted closer to Ronan's leg, a steady weight. Ronan looked at Noah, eyes clear. "Then he's already late." Noah nodded once, like a man finally setting something down. From the trees, the forest listened, and somewhere beyond the lights, a line was crossed. The warm season festival arrived like a kindness the town had been saving. By late afternoon, Main Street glowed as if someone had poured honey over brick and asphalt. Paper lanterns swayed between lampposts. A fiddle sang somewhere near the diner, its notes bright and stubborn. The smell of apple pies and grilled corn drifted through the air, mixing with wood smoke and laughter. Older couples danced slowly in the open space by the bandstand, hands held with a tenderness that came from surviving the same winters together. Ronan Pierce stood at the edge of it all and felt the ache of wanting something simple. He watched a man teach his granddaughter how to step to the beat, watched a woman clap time with a smile that had learned patience the hard way. For a moment, the war inside his chest quieted. Not gone, never gone, but softened like a radio turned down low. Some lives only need peace, he thought, and peace can still be stolen. Atlas patted at his side, boot fitted snugly over, his injured paw. He moved slower than usual, gait measured, but his eyes were bright, lamp clear. He worked with his nose now, not speed, cataloging the layers of scent that braided through the festival. Sugar and sweat, leather and oil, the faint tang of fireworks waiting to burn. Harriet Bloom arrived arm in arm with Lena Merrow, both dressed for the evening. Harriet wore a light blue cardigan over a floral dress, her silver hair pinned neatly back. She looked small but unbreakable, a woman who had learned to keep standing by choosing where to lean. Lena, 19 and still learning the shape of courage, wore jeans and a simple white blouse. Her dark hair fell loose, and she smiled too quickly, like someone borrowing joy on credit. Sheriff Callum Reyes had done this right. Quiet security, not uniforms. A deputy at the corner pretending to argue about pie. Another near the bandstand, nursing a lemonade. June Holloway managed the back lanes with the calm authority of a woman who had counted exits before counting smiles. Harriet spotted Ronan and lifted her chin in greeting. "See?" she called lightly. "No library cards required." Ronan smiled back. "You look dangerous," he said. Harriet laughed. "At my age? Kidnapping me would be a financial mistake. The joke landed easy. It would not stay funny. Atlas paused. His nose lifted. The crowd shifted, a ripple moving outward as someone raised their voice near the cider stand. "I think she fainted." The words cut through music and laughter like a dropped plate. People parted instinctively, a human tide making space for urgency. Harriet swayed, just a little, her hand tightening on Lena's arm. Her face went pale, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. It looked real. It felt real. June was already moving, voice steady. "Give her air." Two figures appeared with professional speed. They wore EMT jackets, navy with reflective striping, and carried a folded stretcher. One was tall and lean, shoulders squared, hair hidden under a cap. The other was broader, posture practiced, voice smooth with the confidence of repetition. "Ma'am," the taller one said gently, "we're going to get you checked." Harriet's knees buckled. The broader EMT caught her easily, competent hands guiding her weight. Ronan took one step forward. Atlas stopped him. The dog's body went rigid. His ears angled back, then forward again. His nose dropped, not to the ground, but to the air behind the cider stand where the EMTs had come from. A low rumble vibrated in his chest. Ronan felt it before he understood it. The wrongness. Not violence, not panic. Clean. Latex. Antiseptic. A sterile note that didn't belong among apple sugar and spilled cider. The EMTs moved with calm efficiency, speaking just loud enough to reassure the crowd. "Blood pressure's low," one said. "Happens in the heat." Lena hovered, terrified. "Harriet." "We've got her," the taller EMT said kindly. "You did the right thing." They rolled Harriet away through the parted crowd. People nodded, relieved. Someone clapped, a reflexive gratitude for order restored. Ronan's jaw tightened. "The evil here doesn't growl," Noah Pike had said. "It smiles, shakes hands." Atlas's rumble deepened, controlled but urgent. Ronan leaned down, hand on the dog's shoulder. "Show me," he whispered. Atlas turned, not toward the ambulance parked at the curb with its lights dark, but toward the narrow lane behind the bakery. He moved slowly, deliberately, weaving through the back of the festival where sound thinned and shadows grew longer. Ronan followed. So did June, already on her radio. "Reyes," she said quietly, "we may have a problem." The alley smelled wrong, too clean. The ambulance door closed with a soft, final thud. No siren, no lights. Ronan's pulse kicked hard. "That's not protocol." Atlas pressed forward, nose tracing the edge of the alley, then lifting again toward the vehicle. His tail stayed low. His body language spoke a clear sentence. "This doesn't belong." Ronan broke into a run. "Sir," a bystander called. June blocked him smoothly. "Medical," she said, voice carrying just enough authority. "Let them work." The ambulance pulled out, slow and polite, turning toward the edge of town. Ronan stopped short of sprinting after it. He forced himself to breathe. "Eden," he said into his phone. "Trail cams." Static, then Deputy Eden Park's voice snapped into clarity. "I've got movement," Eden said. "Unscheduled vehicle, heading out of town." "Type?" Ronan asked. A pause. "Ambulance, but—" Eden hesitated. "It's not ours." Atlas let out a sharp bark, one clean sound like a stamp. Ronan closed his eyes for half a second. Then he opened them. "June," he said. "Back lanes." June nodded, already moving. "Reyes is on it." They didn't chase with sirens. They shadowed. Through roads, the ambulance. Didn't expect, guided by Atlas's nose and Eden's quiet directions. The town thinned. Houses gave way to trees. The glow of lanterns faded behind them. Halfway out, Ronan felt the moment shift. It wasn't fear. It was faith. Atlas paused at a fork where the paved road met a dirt spur, one clean, one rough. The ambulance had taken the dirt, tires biting deep. Atlas sniffed once, then turned left, away from the obvious path, toward a narrow cut through trees. Ronan trusted him. They moved fast but smart, avoiding washouts, skirting places that would slow a heavier vehicle. It felt like the land itself was breathing directions into Atlas's lungs. They reached a ridge where the road dipped sharply. Ronan caught a glimpse through branches, a flash of white, boxy, unmarked beyond the lights. Then Atlas stopped dead. He sat. Perfectly, ears high, body calm, a living command. Ronan felt the hairs on his arms rise. Why stop? Atlas didn't move. Ronan scanned ahead and saw it, a thin line strung between trees, chest high. Not meant to kill, meant to slow. Thank you, Ronan murmured. They circled wide, hearts pounding, the forest holding them close. By the time they reached the lower track, the ambulance was gone, but not lost. Eden's voice crackled in Ronan's ear. Trail cam just tripped. Restricted corridor. Ronan swallowed. They're taking her north. Atlas exhaled, steady. The forest listened, and the night decided it was time to move. The forest did not resist them. It opened. Sheriff Callum Reyes led the column with a calm that steadied the night. His jacket was zipped, radio clipped close, eyes alert without being sharp, authority tempered by care. June Holloway walked point through the brush, ranger's stride economical, steel-gray hair tucked beneath her hat. She moved like someone who knew where roots like to hide. Ronan Pierce stayed beside Atlas. The dog's booted paw made a soft, irregular rhythm against pine needles, but his head stayed high, nose drinking the air as if the night itself were a map. Ronan felt the old familiarity return, not the rush of combat, but the quiet competence of moving with someone who understood him without explanation. Two old warriors learning to trust again. They followed the coordinates from Eden's last ping, the trail cam's unblinking eye guiding them toward an abandoned logging spur. The road thinned to memory, ruts swallowed by moss, broken planks half buried, like ribs. Birch trunks gleamed pale under moonlight, forgiving and watchful. Atlas slowed at a bend. He did not take the easy path. Instead, he angled left, nose dipping toward the ground where iron sang faintly to him. Ronan saw it a heartbeat later, a thin glint at knee height, metal wire pulled tight between two saplings. Trap, Ronan murmured. June nodded once, quiet approval. Good boy. They circled wide. The shack waited ahead, same warped boards, same slumped roof, now lit by the low glow of a lantern inside. A generator hummed somewhere behind it, subdued, like a lie told politely. They approached from downwind. Harriet Bloom sat on a chair near the far wall, wrists bound with rope, but posture straight, chin lifted in stubborn defiance. Her cardigan was rumpled, her silver hair out of place, but her eyes were bright, assessing. When she saw Ronan, she smiled thinly. I told you, she said, voice dry as old paper. Kidnapping me is a poor investment. Relief cut through him, sharp and clean. The man pacing the room froze. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, neatly dressed for the woods. Clean boots, pressed jacket, hands that looked used to signing papers rather than lifting them. His face was handsome in a forgettable way, hair combed back, beard trimmed to the edge of respectability. The kind of man who shook hands with everyone and listened just enough. Elias Varn, land management consultant, contract liaison. A name that had appeared in Noah Pike's confession like a smudge you couldn't quite erase. Varn's smile flickered, then returned, practiced. Sheriff, he said, this is unnecessary. Reyes raised his weapon, steady. Hands where I can see them. Varn spread his palms slowly. You don't understand. I was protecting an arrangement. June stepped forward. You were burying people. Varn's eyes slid to Harriet. She wouldn't have been harmed, Harriet snorted. That's comforting. Atlas moved, not to attack, but to block. He placed himself squarely between Varn and the open door, stance wide, tail low, eyes fixed. His bark cut the air, one precise alert, then silence. Training, not fury. Varn took an involuntary step back. Reyes closed in. On your knees. Varn hesitated, just long enough. Atlas barked again, sharper, commanding. Varn dropped. Cuffs clicked. The generator hummed. The night exhaled. From the tree line came a sound that did not belong to machinery. Footsteps. A man stepped into the lantern light, thin as a shadow that had learned to stand. He wore a weathered coat, too large now, and moved with caution that spoke of old injuries and newer habits. His hair was longer than fashion allowed, gray threaded through dark, beard untrimmed. His eyes, tired, searching, found Ronan, and held. Mason Klein, Reyes breathed. Mason looked older than 12 years should have made him, and younger in the ways that mattered. His gaze carried the weight of long silences, but there was steel beneath it. "I'm sorry," Mason said quietly. "I didn't want anyone else hurt." Ronan felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't known how to name. Mason explained with few words and no drama. 12 years ago he had been pushed, redirected, the search narrowed for safety. Evidence went missing. Lorelei had found it anyway. Documents, maps, a pattern that led back to contracts and access rights. When threats came, Mason chose disappearance over a body count. "Always north," he said, voice low. "It was our promise, a place and a rule." Two figures stepped from behind the shack then. Father Gideon Ash was tall and spare, robe cinched, eyes kind and unflinching. His hair was white, his face lined by listening. He nodded to Reyes with quiet gravity. "I brought food," he said simply, and silence. Beside him stood Dr. Mira Sutton, jacket thrown over scrubs, hands already assessing. Mason's posture like a puzzle she could help solve. "And medicine," she added, "enough to keep a man alive without tying him to a hospital bed." June closed her eyes briefly. "You helped him hide." Father Gideon inclined his head. "I helped him live." Reyes considered, then nodded. "We'll sort it." Varn's shoulders slumped as the truth found him heavier than the cuffs. As dawn crept in, pale and forgiving, they walked Mason out into the light. Birch trunks brightened, leaves whispering like absolution. Harriet stretched her wrists and accepted a blanket, still cracking jokes because courage sometimes needed humor to breathe. Ronan stood with Atlas as the sun broke free. Mason met Ronan's gaze. "Silence kept me alive," he said, "but it nearly killed everything else." Ronan nodded. "Silence is a battlefield," he replied. "You don't have to fight it alone." When it was done, statements taken, vehicles secured, the bad taken away, Ronan stayed. He told Reyes and June his decision with the calm certainty of a man finally choosing a direction. "I'll help build a SAR team," he said. "Local, trained, quiet." June smiled. "We'll take quiet." Atlas leaned against Ronan's leg, warm and steady. Weeks later, the town learned to sleep easier. Atlas became a familiar presence, checking on elders who lived alone, laying his heavy head against knees that shook with loneliness, listening where words failed. He accepted his salary in biscuits and gratitude, but his real pay came when Ronan laughed, not the dry bark of habit, but a true sound that surprised them both. One morning, Ronan stood by the lake where it had begun, light turning water to silver. Always north, he thought. Not a place, a promise. To walk toward the light, even when the heart remembered the mud. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a loyal dog that refuses to leave your side, a stranger who chooses courage over silence, or a road that brings you back to the place you were meant to heal. In this story, nothing supernatural breaks the laws of the world, and yet something sacred moves through it. The kind of grace that feels less like magic and more like God, working through ordinary hearts, through instinct, compassion, and the courage to step toward the light when fear tells us to turn away. In our daily lives, we may not face forests, secrets, or life-and-death choices like Ronan did. But we all face moments where silence is easier than truth, where walking away feels safer than standing firm. And maybe the miracle is this, that when we choose what is right, when we protect the vulnerable, listen to our conscience, and refuse to let fear write the ending, God meets us there. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists in quiet places, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what moment touched your heart the most. And if you'd like to continue walking these stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption with us, subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you north, toward peace, toward truth, and toward the light, even on the days when the path feels hard to see.